Okay, we're off to the races. Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Yeager, Executive Director of NEMA. I want to welcome you to one of our virtual events here. Really excited to get going, but I'm going to turn it over to Scarlett first for a land acknowledgement. Scarlett?
Thanks, Dan. Good afternoon, everyone. Virtual spaces cannot replace the lands that sustain and empower us. I am here in the NEMA office based in Arlington, Massachusetts, the traditional ancestral lands of the Massachusetts tribe and their allied tribes, past, present, and future. NEMA recognizes that our organization and those of our members were founded within a colonizing society, which continues the exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous peoples throughout New England and beyond. You can use the Indigenous Peoples land map. I'm going to drop it here in the chat to find the lands where your museum is located and where you're zooming in from today. Feel free to include it in the chat as you say hello. So thanks again for joining us. I'll turn it back to you, Dan.
Thanks, Scarlett. Appreciate it. You know, the Conservators professional affinity gatherings are always popular, I think, in our crowd for a couple of different reasons. And that's because many years ago, the Conservator folks told me that their main mission in life is to keep people from ruining their objects in their museums, which has a real ring of truth, having been a museum director and having a whole bunch of volunteers trying to polish antique items and et cetera, you know. So that is something that I think is a hugely valuable asset that we've got here at NEMA, is being able to have really true professional conservators helping advise those of us who are not professional conservators. And those folks, you all that are in the conservator ranks, and I see my old friend David Colglazer there. Hey, David, how you doing? And a few others, you know, your expertise on this subject for us lay people is really, really valuable. So anyway, this is absolutely a terrific event for us. Looking forward to it. And I'm going to then turn it over to Camille, Breeze, Barrett, Keating, our two PAG chairs, to get us moving on a delightful subject. Thanks for all you being here today.
Welcome, everybody. I'm happy to introduce Lisa Mehlin, our good friend. You see her there under Elizabeth Mehlin. Lisa is in private practice in Essex, Massachusetts. She has been a paintings conservator for about 20 years now, and she works, like many of us, for government agencies, private institutions, as well as individual clients in the US and in Canada. She has a BA in art history from Williams College and a Master of Art Conservation with a specialization in paintings from Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. She's joining us from her studio in Essex, and she's here to address questions you have about care of paintings in your collections and what you can do as non-conservators to make sure that you are prolonging their life. As always, David Colglazer is here. He's like, as the former PAG chair of the Conservators PAG, David likes to weigh in too. So we're going to get started by asking Lisa a couple questions. So Lisa, why don't you tell me why you chose paintings as your specialty? Lisa, can you hear me?
I think she might be frozen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see her on the screen.
I think she's working on it though. So Barrett, what are you working on right now?
Oh, right now we just have a 1774 pianoforte that came in on a stand, all original. So I was thinking the other day of, I guess, Mozart or someone along those lines would be playing this kind of instrument. So it's quite a challenge. It's had a lot of bad restoration, like everything else that comes in, and we also got a beautiful Biedermeier chair this week, and that's my favorite style. I love Biedermeier, so can't get enough of that. Not enough people have Biedermeier. How about yourself?
Just this morning, we got a very large tapestry designed by Le Corbusier. It is actually a tapestry, which is unusual when we hear about tapestry by contemporary artists like Mural or Picasso. They're usually designs that were then sent overseas, often to Latin America, to be made. They might be braided straw or things like that, but this is an actual European style tapestry, cotton warp, wool weft, and it's quite a bit larger than we expected. And so it's on a tube, and I won't lie, the dollar signs went off when it came in the door, because
Wow.
I was not expecting a large project, actually, believe it or not. I thought it was going to get something like the size of a table. So we're
Isn't that
dying to get it unwrapped and condition reported. We have a photo wall where we have a Velcro slat and a magnetic slat from Small Corp. If you're not familiar with Small Corp, everyone, they're located in Greenfield, Massachusetts, and they do all sorts of display and exhibition solutions from frames to cases. And for textile conservators, they make us slats, powder-coated aluminum slats that go on your wall that either have Velcro or they're set up for a magnetic system. And Small has worked directly with conservators to develop these products, often based on the ideas of conservators. So when we need to initially photograph something that's large, we will pin a strip of Velcro that's first machine sewn to cotton tape or some muslin or something. We pin it onto the top edge, and then we test hang it. And that's how we get a good photograph. And that system works for anyone who's photographing their collection as well. So we're going to have to plan a day when there are 3 people here so we can get this big tapestry hung. Like you, Barrett, sometimes my objects are very big and very heavy. So now that we're a little older, we try to remember to not work past our abilities. And
Yes.
to make sure there's enough people there for hanging things. So if any of you are working on photographing or otherwise hanging large and heavy objects, just take it upon yourselves to get help, because it ages you quickly when you're working beyond your capacities. Let's see, is Lisa online now? I see her studio.
Yep, she's back again.
Hi, Lisa. Can you unmute yourself, please?
I can also unmute.
There she is.
Okay, there she goes.
Hi,
Can you
want
hear
to
me?
introduce yourself? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm having Wi-Fi problems in my studio today, so I apologize. I had to go to my phone because my iPad wasn't connecting well. I couldn't hear anybody. Yes, hi, I'm Lisa Mehlin. I'm a painting conservator in private practice, and here I am. I don't know if people have specific questions, but
My question was just, how did you choose paintings as your specialty?
that's a good question. I actually was going to go into objects, actually, and then in the course of being in grad school, I sort of just gravitated towards paintings and never really looked back. But I do, originally I had a interest in archaeology, and I was going to go into an archaeology program. So I'm definitely interested in objects, but my real love as far as conservation ended up being paintings. So it's kind of been a long road traveled, and it's a complicated, I guess, decision to have made to try to explain in a short little blurb. But yeah, I kind of decided on paintings and never looked back. And I just think that they're fascinating in so many ways in terms of the different.
I'll give her internet a sec to click back in. While we're waiting, I've actually visited Lisa's studio. We collaborated on a project once that was a painted banner. And carry on. You had bad connection for a minute.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know if this is going to work. For some reason, the Wi-Fi in my studio is very spotty today. But yeah, anyway, I'm fascinated by the variety of different types of painted objects and including murals. I've been working on quite a few murals lately. So that's what I was saying at the end.
So murals you do on site at your client?
Correct.
And what is the substrate usually?
It's usually plaster. I mean, I've been working in some historic houses lately, and it's usually, it varies quite a bit, but there's a paint layer usually applied straight to plaster.
Do you find that the New England environment is poor or fair for preservation of mural paintings?
Oh, it's terrible. It's just absolutely terrible. And it's mainly because there's such, well, I've been working recently in Gloucester, and there's such a variety in terms of like the relative humidity from winter to summer, and what that puts a mural through, especially in particularly, non-climate controlled environments. So you can definitely tell a mural that's painted on a north facing wall in a harbor side community like Gloucester, because it's going to look pretty bad.
Right. Wow. When I was in your studio, I noticed that you have a gigantic piece of equipment in there. It takes up much of your space, and it's not an easel as one might have thought. So do you want to tell me what that is and how you use that in your work?
Yeah, so what I have a very large hot table, which is basically it's an aluminum platen that heats up, and so I use that for various different treatments, but in particular for lining paintings that have gotten really damaged, torn, for example, where the original canvas isn't really doing the job of supporting the painting anymore. So I actually will apply a new canvas backing behind the original. And so that's what that huge thing is. It's a 9 by 12 foot suction platen hot table.
Impressive. I wish I had a slightly smaller one, but in the meantime, it's nice to know that that we're friends and I can maybe contract yours. Well, we have a number of questions, so maybe Heather can get us started on those.
Unmute on that one. So if anybody does have any questions, you can go ahead, raise your hand, or type them in the chat. We did get a couple that were painting focused, so we will start with okay. So we do have a poster one. What about vintage posters? Some of ours have already been laminated, unfortunately. So I think this is more of probably, I don't know if you'll be able to answer that or not, or if this is another Ask the Conservators.
Well, paper products are not the specialty of the three of us, because they're generally, industrially printed. And so a paper conservator or a place like NEDCC, which covers all sorts of paper and time-based medium, they're helpful. It's a good time for me to say that if you're looking for a conservator, the best place to go is the American Institute for Conservation's webpage. And their URL is culturalheritage.org. And on the culturalheritage.org website, you'll see, I believe they've officially switched over to calling it Ask a Professional, or find a professional, not find a conservator, because we're trying to be more inclusive with the collections management, collections care community. So you can go on there and you can specify the type of object you have and look within a geographic area. And for example, you would find perhaps poster on an advanced search. And if not poster, then you would look for a paper person, and they'll give you the contact information. You'll see whether they're in private practice like the three of us are, or many times people who work in institutions have to actually bring in a portion of their work in order to get their salary through outside clients, which is an unenviable position to be in. But that's how you would find any additional information that we cannot provide you. So I'm sorry for the paper question, but I'll give you my general recommendation, which is until you know what to do, don't do anything unless there's fire or pest or water. So if they've been laminated for a couple decades, it's probably better to leave them in that condition until you find a person to talk to, rather than to try to do an intervention yourself. But every situation is different. So.
All right, I'm not sure if Lisa's going to be able to answer this one, but what is the best way to store paintings, and how can this be achieved on a tight budget? So collection storage definitely impacts the preservation and conservation of the paintings, though.
It depends on what kind of collection paintings we're talking about. I mean, if, for example, museum collection care, so it's hard to give a general answer to that. But if you're talking about somebody's personal collection of paintings, I can give some general rules of thumb. And one of them is, it seems sort of obvious, but you don't want to put paintings someplace, like in a typical house. People will often put paintings in their closets, stacked up with a bunch of things in front of them. And so people don't characteristically know that there's paintings, or, they'll store them under the bed or something. And then some unwitting person will come along, or somebody's dog will come along and wreak havoc with a stash of paintings that are stored like that. So what I would recommend doing is have a designated area for storage that everyone, is clear about. And so, it seems really obvious, but I can't tell you how many paintings have come in here that have damaged.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second,
sort of
Lisa.
Negligence or not really thinking. Going from,
Just because we're still a little choppy, do you have good just telephone service in your studio? Because you could turn your Wi-Fi off and just see if your phone connection is smoother.
Let me see if I can do that. How do I do that? I'm sorry.
There's a
down
call-in
or-
number.
Yeah. Do I have to log back in?
I have an Android, and you scroll down from the top and you look for the Wi-Fi symbol in your principal menu, and then you tap it so it's off. I don't know if you're, I know you have a brand new iPhone 13. I don't know if that does it like that.
Or the other option is on the confirmation email, it should have a phone number that you could call in as well. And you could just do it by phone instead of being on the Wi-Fi that way.
Okay, why don't I try that? I'll call back in. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, so I do have two textile and a textile question and a furniture question. So our meeting room has 100-year-old wooden chairs. Is there any reason why we should not reglue the joints as needed?
There's lots of reasons. That's a complicated question. I guess the first, is this a museum, a historical society?
Yes, Meredith is actually on the line, so she might be able to give you more information.
Okay.
Yes, we were given the wooden chairs from our old Odd Fellows Hall. And that's what we sit on when we have meetings or when we're at work tables. And the joints dry out. And there's 40 chairs or more.
Yeah.
And then I started worrying that, oh no, are we doing something wrong? But if they're not reglued, they're not quite as safe.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So you're using them, you want to continue using them. So that's important. So you want them to be functional. If they're 100 years old, Meredith, they would have been glued with hide glue, which is it's an animal glue that's, it's a protein colloid glue that comes from, when horses and cows die. It's the same thing as gelatin, except it's not purified. And the great thing about hide glue is that you heat it up in a pot, and it's reversible. So every time you need to re-glue chairs, which is part of the life of a chair, all the abuse that they go through, you can put new hide glue in on the old hide glue, and it melts right into it, and you can just keep gluing it for hundreds of years without taking the old glue off, because it's a natural glue that is also reversible with hot water or steam. The caveat is you don't want to glue your chairs with modern, what we call plastic glues, PVA or PVC glues, because they're not good, and they're almost impossible to reverse, or very difficult for conservators to reverse. So yeah, if you glue them with hide glue, it's no problem. If you, do you have a conservator on staff, or is it all volunteers?
We're all volunteers. So where do you get? I doubt if my hardware store has it. I don't know.
They actually do, Meredith. Believe it or not, the company that makes, the big chemical company that makes the plastic glues that you don't want to use, like Tight Bond and Carpenter glues, they make a brown bottle. It's called hide glue. It's made by Tight Bond, and it is the same hide glue that's in the pot that I use every day. That's heated to 150 degrees, but it's in a cold solution, and it's a little bit thicker, and it stays open for an hour, which is very important. So in other words, as you're taking all that time to put a chair together that you've taken apart and cleaned the joints, you want to have an open time, which is before that glue sets. So that's why that would be a great glue for you to use. But you have to keep in mind, for those types of glues to work properly, you need a tight joint where the wood is touching wood. So if you have a gap in between the chair, the stretchers, and going into the back rails or the front legs, those type of glues aren't going to last very long, because they're what's called adhesives. Their strength comes in having joints that are very close together, and the molecules bond to the wood itself, not to the glue itself. If you have a space in between the wood, you need a different type of glue, and the only glue that's cohesive or has strength in itself are called epoxies. And if you're going to use epoxies on old chairs, you really want to consult a conservator, because you have to put down a reversible layer of hide glue first, so that epoxy patch can be taken out in the future. Otherwise, you're making an irreversible repair. So best thing to do would be to get a conservator in there who could train you, the right way to glue them. And then you could do it yourselves. You could take notes and have a path to go that's the right path to go. And don't worry about not doing anything to the chairs. I always tell people, benign negligence is the best curator. So when a chair gets, the best thing that happens when some people will bring a chair into the shop and they're not loose enough, I tell them bring it back in a year and a half when it's even more loose, because it's a lot easier to restore then.
Now, did you say to put on the hide glue after you have cleaned the joint?
Yes. Yeah. You really need to
Explain, please.
okay. The only way to properly fix a chair. Okay, chairs are the bane of my existence. It was one year I thought I could stop fixing chairs, and I actually did. And the next year I looked at my income and it was 30% less. And I said, oh, I'm going to have to fix chairs for the rest of my life. But the only way to fix them is you have to take them apart. What do they have for seats, Meredith? Are they solid wood seats or?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. So you need to properly disassemble the whole chair, clean every mortise and tenon joint, put some of the stretchers together and all the joints together. If they're loose, you need to build them up with a super thin piece of veneer, cigar cedar wraps, which are a fraction of a millimeter thick. They're perfect to take hide glue, just put on one wrap, take some hot water, clean it, and let it dry. An hour later, you can try fitting it into the joint until you get that perfectly tight joint. And then you can, when you have all the joints like that and you glue that chair together, it'll last you another 30 years. As long as nobody's leaning back in it. Don't ever let. I had these beautiful Biedermeier chairs come in yesterday, and the owner told me that all the men that come to the house lean back at them. And oh my God, I couldn't believe it. They're exquisite, one of a kind chairs. And I said, don't ever let anybody into your house that leans back in a chair, because it ruins a chair. It takes all the engineering for a chair to make it to sit straight up and down. And the minute you lean back in it, it defies all that engineering, and it racks. The whole chair racks and comes apart.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Meredith. If you email me at my website, I'll be glad to tell you more information about it if you need afterwards.
Okay.
Lisa might be on the, Lisa might be on the phone now, I think.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Nice.
Lisa, we're gonna ask Heather to read out the paintings question that is in the memo list.
Okay.
Actually, the other one that came in on the chat is more paper. Because they're do you deal with charcoals and pastels at all?
No, I really don't. And that's really a specialization of a paper conservator, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think the paper and painting. So if anybody does have any painting related ones, go ahead and ask those. But Camille, I think this one might be more for you. We have patches, badges from Girl Scouts. We're instructed to store them in archival safe coin plastic sleeves. They keep sliding out of the pages in the 3-ring binders. Can we keep them in the original plastic packages and then insert them into the coin slots? Use tape to keep the tops closed, use school glue.
That's like you get a B for whoever decided to put them in the archival sleeves, because they are made of polyethylene and they are inert and they will not impact the patches or yellow or stiffen. Usually, sometimes the cheap ones they smell a little like vinegar and they should be replaced. But like you said, there's really no good way to seal the top. If you are a collector and you don't open them very often, you can staple them at the top, but I don't think that's really a long-term solution. And any kind of tape runs the risk of eventually touching the patch. So what I would suggest instead is that you purchase a package of polyethylene zip top bags. You can get them in several sizes. You can start at an archival supply company like University Products, Gaylord, Hollinger Metal Edge, Talus. Talus Online is their website. And look for different sizes of polyethylene, pure polyethylene zip top bags. They come from, sort of 2 inches square that we use for samples on up to something you could put a winter coat in. And although you might end up with more little baggies than you could ever use, that's a really good way to do it. Once you've got your patches in a bag, and try not to get the ones with a white strip on them that you can write on, because that limits your visibility, or you might want to put it backwards in that envelope. But then you can store them sort of in a box, for example, in a stack, or you could engineer a box or purchase a box that has maybe some separators. So what it lacks in sort of neat organization, it makes up for in making sure that they're all safe and sealed. Then they're a little bit slippery and they can be a challenge for people who like their storage boxes to look perfect. But I have only ever framed patches. I've framed the Boy Scout Jamboree patches, and so that was a different solution altogether. But that is probably the least expensive and sort of most practical, down-to-earth solution that I could suggest for you. If you were to put them back in their original package, as you say, I don't know if this is what kind of original you mean. Maybe the packages they were donated to you in, but I worry about any old packaging. However, authentic original packaging that belonged to something is usually worth keeping, but you might not keep it in the same place as the patch. And I'm not encouraging you to clutter up your storage room, but if the packaging is, if you've kept it and has some merit or some information on it, you should catalog it separately from the patch, or as an A and a B, and make sure that you maintain the information in that package, and then consider whether you need to keep the package or not. It actually can be the packaging that's the more complex part of this question. So.
And then we had an entire one last time on plastics. So if you want to go to the NEMA website to learn about the plastics and the storage of those, which I have a feeling some of the badges might have been in as well. Okay, so we do have a painting one. Is it important to occasionally look at the back of a painting to check its condition from that perspective? This would be for a historic house museum.
Absolutely. And I would also say that it depends on the situation with the house that's in, where the painting is, but I would suggest that a lot of historic houses in this area are not, air conditioned in the summer and are marginally heated in the winter. And so if you're dealing with an unheated or not very climate controlled environment, it's even more important to monitor what's happening. And what you really want to look for on the back of the painting, particularly if the painting is hanging on a north-facing wall or on some kind of masonry wall, you want to look and make sure that there is no mold growing. And just as an aside here, people will often put backing boards on paintings like coroplast, which is a material that really is not breathable. And I don't encourage that, because what you're doing is creating essentially a closed environment where mold can thrive, particularly, like I say, if it's on a north-facing wall where there's not, it tends to, condensation tends to form on those kinds of walls. And so you just have to definitely keep that monitored. And also, like I say, I would get rid of backing boards in general. And if you do need to use a backing board, then I would use something with some open areas so that air can circulate through. And I would use like an archival mat board or something of that type.
So this kind of follows up to what you just said. David had a question. What sort of protective procedures do you follow for frame painting so that they can be hung for display? Cannot talk today.
Can you say that again? I'm for some reason still having difficulty.
No, that's fine. So what sort of protective procedures do you follow for frame painting so that they can be hung for display?
Protective procedures? Well, in general, what I do when I reframe something to go on display is, you know, I don't want to have something that I've just put a lot of time and energy into, and then have it, you know, oftentimes old frames will have poor hanging wire, or, you know, they'll have these hook eye kind of arrangements for hanging. And so one thing I would highly recommend is that people install D-ring hangers and new hanging wire. And it's not expensive to do that. And actually the sources that Camille talked about will have those kinds of hanging, like the D-rings. And I recommend the ones that take 2 screws each so that you have a backup. So you're not, basically everything isn't depending on one screw holding something tight, because they just work their way loose over time. And that's definitely true of hook eyes. I mean, I basically get rid of hook eyes anytime I see them on a painting. But more generally, as far as framing goes, that's a whole other kind of ball of wax, I guess. And the main thing I would be concerned with is just, you want to have the painting put into the frame with some padding inside the rebate edge so that it's not getting abraded. And you also want to use mending plates and not nails to put the painting into the frame so that it can be removed more easily without damaging anything. You don't really want anything getting nailed into the stretcher. Paintings are also under tension. So the stretcher, it really has to be stretching the painting. And anytime you kind of have to manhandle it into a frame, and, you know, you're running the risk of not having it stay properly tensioned. And so the other final thing I'd say is make sure the frame is not too tight, because if you're jamming the painting in to a frame after expanding the stretcher and getting it nice and you know, tensioned, then you're really undermining your efforts.
Okay. So how do you deal with heavily varnished surfaces that have yellowed or gotten dirty? Pretty sure there's a lot of them out there.
So that's actually something that you should talk to a conservator about, because if a painting looks really dirty and yellow, a bunch of different things can be going on, and it may not be varnish, but it might be. It could also be a combination of grime and varnish, or it could be that the painting, I mean, I see paintings that come in sometimes that have been covered with polyurethane, and that tends to get very yellow-orange colored. But that's not something anyone should be trying to deal with on their own. In fact, polyurethane is a real trick to try to deal with, because it's a harder surface than the underlying paint. And so when you try to remove that layer, it's basically creating this huge mess. So what I would recommend is if you have a paint that's really dark, take it to a conservator, because they'll be able to, either tell you from looking at it or from some testing whether you're dealing with something like cigarette smoke or you're dealing with, surface grime plus some other layer of varnish that needs to be addressed. But it's not really something that it's not easy to tell what you're really dealing with. So I would definitely say you should definitely consult with somebody, a professional conservator about that.
And have you ever conserved painted fireplace inserts? This is also from a historic house up in Maine as well.
I have not. Yeah, so I guess I'll have to pass on that question because I really don't. I don't have any experience with that.
Okay, so we have a little bit of a open space. So if anybody does have any more painting questions, you can either unmute yourself or type it in the chat. Camille, I did have a question come in through the registration process. I have a woven fabric, which I purchased several years ago. How do I determine its age?
Oh, that's a good question. You find a specialist. Unfortunately, no. So if I have something and I'm unfamiliar with what it is, then I usually hit Google or even eBay, and I just try to describe it visually. But if I know what it is, like I know it's early American and I want to date it, then that level of connoisseurship is pretty hard to gain just through internet or library visits. The reason being technology doesn't change that often or that rapidly. So can you say a little bit about it? Are you here in person?
Unfortunately, I don't think they are.
Oh, okay. I would say that is what we broadly refer to as a curatorial problem. So for example, if you're talking about like something that is a homespun, something like that, then you might contact like the American Museum of American History, National Museum of American History, or someplace like that. That's a real sticky thing. Even a good textile appraiser, of which I only actually know one nationally, but she's probably not going to be able to do it. And it's so new that you can't sort of drop a dime for some sort of a strontium isotope identification or anything like that. So the best you can hope for is probably to find something similar, or if it's something from a culture other than your own, is to find a specialist in that area. Because even microscopy, we can identify what it is, and we can tell you if it's like beat up, but we can't tell you if it's 400 years beat up. So that's pretty tough. I also have a paintings question.
Okay, Meredith also has her hand raised too.
Oh, go Meredith.
Okay, so we have a few framed pictures that are like 24 inches by 36 inches or something like that. And I think they're probably maybe charcoal, but they're, gray or pastel or something. And the frame has a glass. Should we just, leave them the way they are if we don't see any problem with that? Or is the glass a problem?
So if it's a charcoal drawing you're talking about here, I mean, again, that's not particularly my area, but I can give you a general answer as far as glass over drawings like that. I mean, for pastels and for charcoal in particular, they definitely need to have a glazing layer. So by that, I mean something covering the piece itself, so that it doesn't get, I mean, they're just typically very poorly bound materials. And so they tend to get, easily damaged or, so, but what people don't understand is that something like glass itself has sort of a charge on it, a static charge. And so that's not an ideal material to have directly in contact with your artwork. And so one of the easiest things to do is to basically take the piece to a framer and make sure that there's some kind of an insert that separates the artwork from the glass. And another option would be something which I actually think is preferable would be to have a non-static conservation grade acrylic glazing layer put over. And that also has the advantage of having a UV blocking component to it. And they have, so there's Static Shield is one that's made by TrueView, and that's an acrylic UV filtering anti-static acrylic material. And so without getting into too many technical things here, it's good to have something over the piece, but it's not good to have it in direct contact.
Thank you.
I'm
Camille,
just
did you want
putting
to
the-
ask your question or?
Yeah, I just typed in TrueView because there are a lot of ways to spell those two words. So it's TRUVUE Inc. And that's probably their URL as well. And TrueView has a number of products. Optium is one of the products that we use a lot as well. There is a grant offered by the American Institute for Conservation. The deadline is May 15th, and they will provide up to $3,000 worth of TrueView acrylic products for a conservation project. I've already asked all of my clients if they have anything, and it has to be an exhibition institution. It can't be like a hospital or something like that, or like an old fellows lodge. But if you have a conservation project that that involves glazing, like say a collection of samplers or a painting, why don't you write in and talk to us? There's still a couple of weeks left to apply for this grant, and I can help you find a conservator who's suitable to that. So sorry, sales pitch over. Yes, I wanted to show Lisa my favorite painting. So I bought this in an auction. It's by Julia Beers. She's adjacent to the Hudson River Valley school. It's in a correct arts and crafts frame, although it's been overpainted with a gold paint, and but it is well consolidated. The back of my painting has just a board that seems to be consistent with the age of this, which is late 19th century. And my question is, forgive me, I'm going to touch it, but my painting's on a board and it's loose. Like I can see up here past the painted field. So I'm not worried about it being loose because as Lisa said, it needs a little bit of fluctuation. But what I'm curious about, first of all, is what kind of board might this be? Is it a paper board or a wood board? And also, I have UV filtration on my windows. It hangs pretty close to a window, and it's not very highly filtered because I maximize the visibility through the studio windows, but it does have UV filtration. Is there a way that I can monitor whether I'm doing any harm to my painting by having it near to a window? And also, what do they mean by board?
Okay, well, I unfortunately I can't see the painting anymore because I'm calling in now because
Well,
of
it's
the
little.
internet connection.
It's about 8 by 12, 6 by 12. It's a nice small guy, and it's oil.
Okay, okay. So if it's oil, I can't tell what kind of board it's on, but in general, if you look at the back and it looks sort of like a cardboard type of material, then it's probably an artist board that was prepared, commercially for artists to paint on, and those generally are pretty, they don't tend to have a lot of issues other than, warping and things like that. But with a piece that's small like that, I would be surprised if there's any major problems. If it's on wood, it would be, you kind of have to look at the back and determine, or you could also just look at the edges if it is loose in the frame, and you might get some more information there. Either way, though, if it's reasonably well prepared and the paint is in good shape and it's not flaking off or whatever, then that basically tells you that the paintings are basically like a composite of whatever the substrate or support is. So say that it's an artist board, and then you have a priming layer, like a ground layer, for example, which is something you typically don't see. And then on top of that ground layer is the paint layer. And so if all of that's working well, you shouldn't see problems on the surface. Like if the paint is starting to flake off, it's often a problem with the ground. It's not actually a problem with the support, but that's another thing for a conservator to determine. So what I would say is if the paint seems to be in good shape, you know, you shouldn't have to worry too much about UV. You know, oil paintings are pretty impervious to UV. I mean, I shouldn't say impervious, but they don't fade or tend to change much. Now that is modern paints is what I'm talking about here. There are definitely some examples, like you may be familiar with the artist Joshua Reynolds, and a lot of his paintings he painted with late pigments, which are essentially they're actually dyes. They're not pigments, so they're not light fast, and so those actually do fade. But again, if this painting is 100 years old or so, and you don't see any significant fading, then you don't have to worry necessarily about having those kind of, I mean, those pigments are really were taken off the market a long time ago. So today's, you know, paints are based, as long as there's something like, for example, cadmiums, or, you know, those pigments are really pretty light fast, and they're pretty good. They don't fade. It's different with something like a watercolor, where absolutely you don't want UV, you know, getting in to the scene at all. But like, you know, people always ask me, should you put UV blocking glass over an oil painting? And I really don't think that that's a good idea. I think it's better to just have the painting be out in the air, and it's better for the painting overall to not be encouraging mold and all kinds of other issues. Plus the glazing really detracts from seeing the painting, and it doesn't really provide an awful lot of added, you know, benefit.
Thank you. I can see there's marbled paper on the back of the board through the perimeter of the wood backing board. So maybe it is an artist board. I didn't know they existed back then.
Yeah, I mean, so you said the painting is about a turn of the century, right?
Yeah, it's Hudson River.
Okay, so yeah, there were definitely commercially prepared materials back then. I mean, without being able to see it, I'm really kind of operating blind here as to what is going on. But it could be, I mean, there's been paintings on various types of board for forever. But yeah, I mean, so I can't tell you whether that's marbled. You know, the marble paper makes me think it's probably some kind of an artist board, a fairly early version of one. But
interesting. I'll show it to you sometime. But in the meantime, I'm glad to know that oil paint is not a super sensitive medium, and so it's my only valuable painting. So I want to take care of it.
Yeah, it's not, you know, people are always surprised when I tell them, you know, and the exception to that would be, you know, you don't want to have a painting hanging someplace where there's a, you know, one really bright area of sunlight hitting one part of the painting. And that's for a variety of reasons, but it's, you know, you don't want something in uneven amounts of light, but as long as it's getting a fairly consistent amount of light, and it's not, you know, just, you know, completely swamped in sunlight all day, I think it shouldn't be an issue with an oil painting.
Thank you.
All right, so we did have one more question in the chat. Would you recommend storing unframed painted canvases on hanging racks, or on shelves, or in vertical racks?
Unframed canvases, so they're stretched canvases, right?
Yes, she's nodding her head, yes.
Okay.
The situation is that we have the opportunity, we're building a new storage facility, and we have some painted canvases that are not framed in our storage, and I just want to know what is the best kind of situation to move them into.
Okay, well, definitely do not put them flat unless there's some condition issue that's requiring them to be flat. Like say there's damage or the painting is flaking, where you would, you might want to have a proprietary area for that, for things that may have condition problems and need to be stored flat. But otherwise, storing things flat with paintings on canvas is not ideal, because what happens is, because the paintings are tensioned, when they're flat, the weight of the painting itself, the canvas, tends to weigh down, and it can get an imprint from the stretcher bars. And I see this all the time with paintings that have been stored flat, and you can rectify that and fix it. But, if you're dealing with a fairly large number of paintings, the ideal way to store them would be in racks upright. And hanging them, museums often will have hanging racks, which are fine too, but then you would have to be putting a hanging device on the back of the stretcher, which has its own issues. And I would say if you can put things flat and just standing upright, you can put in some, carpeting or something like that, so the painting has something to grab hold of. So it's not, you don't want things sort of loose and sort of skidding into other items, depending on, again, how many things you're dealing with and how big of a rack you have. But I would basically put the paintings upright and then put something in between each one, whether it be, again, archival mat board or something like that, just so that things aren't pushing on each other or potentially damaging one another.
Great, thank you very much.
You're
Okay,
welcome.
we have one more. Could you speak generally about the effects of RH swings on oil paintings?
Yes, I can. So that is the number one issue that affects oil paintings. So it's not so much, people ask me about having paintings in their unheated house that they go to Florida in the winter and they only keep the house at minimum temperature, and then in the summer they don't have air conditioning, so the fluctuations are sort of wild, in the house. And it's not, to me, so much the issue of the actually in the winter when it's sort of like relatively dry. That's definitely preferable to say having something in an air conditioned environment where the humidity is, it's summer and it's hot and humid. That the fluctuation between those two things is really the issue, not so much the one or the other. It's both, and it's the combo over many years that creates a kind of a perfect storm for paintings. And so so that would be the thing I would say. You really don't want to be putting paintings through that kind of a cycle if you can possibly help it. And if there's one thing I would say in that regard is really don't store paintings in attics, or damp cellars, like all of those places where they're just going to be subjected to crazy humidity fluctuations. It's just, that's absolutely terrible for paintings. Or putting paintings over your fireplace isn't so great either.
And Camille, David is pointing out that you might need to change those screw eyes on your painting.
No, David, thank you. It's at least it's the wire. If you have a choice, if you're buying your own wire, it's a coated wire with some kind of plasticky coating on it. I don't actually care what kind of the plastic it is. It's not going to do any damage if it off-gases, but it does resist the corrosion. And some of us have big things hanging on old metal wire that is all frayed and cuts your fingers and stuff. So at least my wire is good. Yeah, I had a question. I remember being in a situation where I was taught to stack paintings back to front, front to back, back to front. I think that was like when carrying them, which is a horrible thing to talk about. But if you have archival board between paintings, Lisa, do you have to worry about this back to front thing? Did it have a greater meaning?
Yeah, well, and again, it really matters. It doesn't so much matter if the paintings are unframed, okay? But yeah, ideally you'd want to have back to front, front to back, and it's mainly because paintings can be, it's just easy to damage one with another one that's adjacent. And so it's sort of what I was talking about before with the archival board that you want to be, spacers and so on. What really becomes important is if the paintings are framed, and the frames are really, ornamental and really, they have elements that stick out 3D, you know what I'm saying? And so you really want to have the frame front to a frame front, and then have the back with a wire and all the things that can stick into a painting and all of that stuff. You want the back of that to face the back of another one. And make sure that the wire isn't, loose and sticking out and all of that. And in fact, you can even, tape it down or do something to keep it from just being potentially damaging to anything. You're essentially trying to keep as little contact between the painted surface and anything else.
Excellent. Heather, are there any other questions in the queue?
Nope, I think we've answered them all, or the ones that people wanted to actually ask. I know there's probably a bunch of other ones in the back of everybody's minds. So Camille and Barrett's information is actually on the NEMA website. And if you guys want to share your emails and stuff like that, if anybody has any follow-up questions. As always, I always love these sessions. So I want to thank Camille and Barrett for putting this together. Camille, do you have any final words?
Yeah, I wanted to give Lisa's email, Lisa at, and then her last name, Mehlin, conservation.com. Lisa at mehlinconservation.com. If you have any additional questions for her. And I guess that's it. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. I learned a ton about paintings and also about chairs.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.